God doesn't waste battles, he entrusts them. That's something you've got to let sink into your spirit, because if you don't understand that, you'll think the chaos you're living through is some kind of punishment. But God isn't petty. He's purposeful. If you've been handed the storm, it's not because you're weak, it's because you're worthy. If you've been trusted with the presence of a narcissist in your life, someone who manipulates, controls, gaslights, and distorts the truth until you don't even recognize your own reflection, it's not because God abandoned you, it's because he saw something in you the enemy hoped you would never discover: endurance, authority, and divine assignment. See, when you're in it, when you're knee-deep in the confusion, when you're questioning your worth, your sanity, your strength, it's easy to think God made a mistake. It's easy to think, why would a loving God allow me to be tangled in someone else's dysfunction? But here's the truth. He didn't send the narcissist, but he trusted you with the battle. He trusted you to carry the weight of that chaos, not so it would crush you, but so it would call something out of you that comfort never could. There are some strengths you will never discover in the sunshine. Some anointings are only revealed in the fire. And when you've been in the orbit of a narcissist, every day feels like fire. They twist your words, rewrite history, paint you as the villain in the story God wrote you to be the victor in. But what they didn't know is that you were made for this. You were built by God to endure, to discern, to rise. You were trusted with this because someone else needed to see what it looks like to walk through a war zone with peace still in your spirit. You thought you were being attacked, but you were actually being assigned. You thought the battle was meant to break you, but it was designed to build you. Because God doesn't hand out battles to the most talented or the most perfect or the most prepared. He gives them to the ones he can trust. And if he trusted you with that level of chaos, that means he's placed something inside you that hell can't handle. It's not just about surviving them, it's about shifting the atmosphere. They never expected you to take authority over. You weren't just in their life to be controlled. You were placed there to confront a cycle. You were the interruption to their manipulation. And you were the holy disruption to their generational destruction. And that's why it hurt. That's why it felt so confusing. Because you were standing in the middle of something spiritual while trying to make sense of it emotional. God knew you'd feel lost. He knew you'd question everything. And still, he said, I choose them. Because what he placed inside you isn't soft. It's sacred. It's fierce. It's unshakable. And even when you cried yourself to sleep, even when you started to believe their lies, even when you forgot who you were, he didn't. He still saw the warrior. He still saw the freedom fighter. He still saw the generational chain breaker. And he wasn't panicking because he knew this would not be wasted. This would not end with defeat. This would not finish with you forgotten or broken or buried. This would end with you walking out stronger, wiser, and with the kind of authority that only battle-scarred believers ever walk in. You didn't ask for the fight, but God trusted you with it. And what he trusts, he empowers. What he assigns, he anoints. What he calls, he carries. So if you're in it, you're not being punished. You're being prepared, because this isn't just a battle, it's a proving ground, a setup for something greater than you could even imagine. Your capacity is bigger than their control. That's why they had to try so hard to keep you small. That's why they needed to twist your words, shrink your confidence, question your worth, and make you feel like you were the problem in every situation. They weren't afraid of you leaving. They were afraid of you realizing that you never needed them in the first place. Because once you saw your own strength, their manipulation lost its power. And the truth is, They saw your capacity long before you did. That's why they tried to bear it under control. See, a narcissist doesn't attack your weakness. They go after your strength. They go after the light in you because it exposes the shadows in them. And if they can't dim your light, they'll try to convince you it's blinding. They'll take your compassion, call it naivety. They'll take your loyalty and call it neediness. They'll take your wisdom and call it rebellion, because the moment you stop second-guessing yourself is the moment they lose control. And make no mistake, they were never in love with you. They were in love with the way you made them feel powerful. But here's the shift. When God starts opening your eyes, when He starts awakening the part of you that remembers who you are, suddenly their control doesn't work like it used to. Suddenly their silence doesn't shake you. Their approval doesn't define you. Their chaos doesn't consume you, because the Spirit of God on the inside of you starts speaking louder than their gaslighting. And you matured out of their manipulation. You evolved past their approval, and the enemy lost his favorite access point to your identity. You didn't lose your mind. You outgrew the manipulation. You didn't become difficult. You stopped being controlled. You didn't get bitter. You got boundaries, and that scared them, because control only works where there's confusion. But once clarity enters the room, once purpose starts rising in your spirit, you realize you don't owe them your peace to keep the illusion of theirs. You don't have to fold to keep from breaking. You don't have to shrink so they can feel tall. Your capacity, your God-given capacity, is bigger than their need to control the narrative. They told you that you were too much, but that was only because they couldn't handle the weight of your calling. They said you were hard to love, but that was only because real love exposes counterfeit affection. They tried to label you, but God already named you. And when God names you, no amount of control can redefine you. No amount of criticism can erase what heaven has written. You're not who they said you were in their weakest moments. And you may have walked through seasons of silence, second-guessing, questioning whether you were crazy. But even in your confusion, your capacity was growing. Even in your tears, your strength was maturing. Even when you felt stuck, heaven was moving. Because your value was never up for negotiation. It wasn't determined by who loved you correctly. It was established by the one who formed you. They couldn't see it because they didn't give it. They couldn't control it because they didn't create it. And that's why you're still standing. That's why the worst of their words couldn't kill your destiny. You were never in their hands. You've always been in God's. Your capacity is dangerous to the enemy because it means you're no longer afraid to take up space. You're no longer willing to keep peace that costs you your purpose. You're no longer apologizing for being too passionate, too intense, too sensitive, too bold. Because the truth is, you're not too much. You were just in an environment that was too small. And now that you see it, now that you know what you carry, you'll never settle for less again. You'll never go back to being boxed in, labeled, or controlled, because you've seen what you're made of. And you know now their control was loud, but your capacity is louder. Pain is a platform for purpose. It doesn't feel like it when you're in it, when everything inside you is breaking and nothing makes sense. It doesn't feel like purpose when you're crying on the bathroom floor, questioning your worth, trying to hold your sanity together while someone else plays games with your reality. It feels like punishment. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. But God doesn't waste pain. What you're going through isn't random. It's refining. It's preparing something inside you that comfort never could. Because pain has a way of unlocking doors in your soul that ease would never even knock on. There are things that only pain can teach you. Not because God enjoys watching you suffer, but because He knows what's inside of you. He knows what He put in you. And He knows that sometimes the only way to reveal the diamond is to put it under pressure. You didn't walk through that storm for nothing. You didn't survive that relationship, that betrayal, that trauma just to say you made it out. No. You walk through it because there's someone on the other side of your story who's still stuck in theirs. And God trusted you to be the bridge. He trusted you to be the one who didn't just bleed but healed. He trusted you to be the one who wouldn't just cry but testify. Pain gives birth to purpose when you stop asking, why did this happen to me, and start asking, what is this trying to produce in me? That shift in perspective is the moment your pain stops being the enemy and starts becoming your fuel. That's when you realize that everything the enemy sent to destroy you is now being used to develop you, because God doesn't cause all things, but He sure can use all things. The heartbreak, the manipulation, the silence, the anxiety, the fear, it's all being repurposed. Your pain is a platform, a stage where God shows off His power through your scars, a spotlight where healing starts speaking louder than hurt. You were meant to be more than a survivor. You were called to be a speaker, a healer, a liberator. That's why the pain was so intense. That's why the attack was so strategic, because purpose was attached to your name before the pain ever found your address. And the enemy tried to use the narcissist chaos to cancel your calling, but all he did was stir up the gift inside you. The more they tried to shut you down, the louder your purpose started to whisper. Even when you didn't feel it, it was growing. Even when you wanted to quit, it was maturing. Because your story isn't over at the place where it broke you. That's just a plot twist. That's just the moment God started rewriting what the enemy meant for evil and began turning it into something glorious. Don't be ashamed of your pain. Don't hide your scars. Those very wounds you thought disqualified you are the evidence that you made it. And more than that, they're the access point for someone else's freedom. Someone out there doesn't need your perfection. They need your honesty. They need to see what grace looks like after the storm. They need to know they're not the only ones who got tangled in the lies and made it out alive. They need your voice, and your voice is powerful because it comes from pain. It comes from the valley. It comes from the fire, and that's why it carries weight. Because when you speak, you don't speak theory. You speak testimony. You speak from the place you once bled, and that gives hope like nothing else can. Pain has always been a platform for the people God uses most. Not because He enjoys our suffering, but because He turns our wounds into weapons. And if you're still here, still breathing, still standing, that means your purpose has outlived your pain. It means the platform is ready. And you were chosen to stand on it, not because you have it all together, but because you've seen what it's like to fall apart and still be held by grace. God let it break you so He could rebuild you better. You thought the breaking was the end, but it was actually the beginning. What you thought was falling apart was really falling into place. Because sometimes God doesn't fix what's broken. He lets it break all the way down so He can build it back the right way, the real way. That relationship, that identity, that image you held so tightly to. It had to go. It had to shatter, not because God wanted to see you in pieces, but because he couldn't allow you to keep living behind a mask that was never meant to fit you in the first place. When you were with that narcissist, you didn't realize how much of yourself you were shrinking to make it work. How much of your voice you silenced, how much of your truth you twisted just to keep the peace. You bent so much that breaking was inevitable. But God didn't abandon you in the breaking. He was right there holding every piece you thought you had to carry alone. He saw the version of you that was being molded by manipulation, and he said, I love you too much to let you stay like this. So he allowed it to break. The illusion, the idol, the false peace. He let it all fall so he could build something that would last, something rooted, something real. You prayed for strength and he gave you struggle. You prayed for clarity and he allowed confusion, not to punish you, but to push you into dependence. Not on the narcissist, not on your performance, but on him. Because when everything crumbled, when the person you depended on became the one who damaged you, that's when you discovered the only foundation that doesn't shake. You found out that peace doesn't come from people, it comes from presence. And identity doesn't come from validation, it comes from revelation. The revelation that you were always enough, even when they made you feel like you were too much. It hurt, let's be real. It nearly destroyed you. It left you questioning everything, your choices, your discernment, your value. But even in your darkest moments, God was at work. Even in your tears, he was laying the foundation for something new. You didn't know it then, but every time you felt like giving up, something inside you was being fortified. Every time you cried out and heard nothing back, your faith was being stretched beyond emotion and into endurance. Because what God is building in you now can't be shaken by the same winds that once broke you. You're not being put back together the way you were. This isn't about returning to the old version of you. That version was surviving. This one is thriving. That version was performing. This one is powerful. That version was dependent on people. This one knows who their source is. The breaking wasn't failure, it was freedom. Freedom from the lies, freedom from the cycle, freedom from the constant need to prove your. God let it break because he knew you deserved better than that. The image you were pretending to be, he knew the real you was buried underneath all that approval chasing and fear and compromise. And he loved that version of you too much to let her stay buried. So don't mourn the breaking like it was the end. Mourn it like a funeral for who you were never meant to be. Mourn it like a shedding, like a holy undoing, because God isn't just putting you back together. He's giving you a new foundation. He's building with truth this time, with peace, with clarity, with boldness. You're not who you were when this started. You've been broken open, but not broken down. You've been humbled, but not destroyed. And everything that was lost in the breaking, God is replacing with something stronger, deeper, and more real than you ever imagined. What tried to confuse you, God will use to clarify you. That season of chaos that left you questioning everything. The one where up felt like down and truth felt like a trap. Wasn't sent to destroy you, it was sent to refine your discernment. The enemy thought if he could confuse your mind, he could cancel your purpose. If he could distort your reality long enough, you'd forget who you are. God allowed the fog because he was about to bring focus. He allowed the confusion because clarity born out of pain sticks deeper than any lesson taught in comfort. You don't just know the truth now, you've lived through the lie. Narcissistic confusion isn't surface level. It's spiritual. It's systematic. It's designed to make you doubt your instincts, second guess your convictions, and eventually stop trusting your own voice. It's subtle. It doesn't start with obvious control. It starts with little compromises. A twisted word here, a silent treatment there, a slight shift in the story that makes you feel crazy for even asking the question. And before you know it, you're not living. You're performing. You're tiptoeing around their moods. You're apologizing for things you didn't do. You're carrying the weight of their dysfunction like it's your responsibility to fix it. That's not love. That's confusion. That's warfare. But the very thing that was sent to confuse you is the thing God is using to clarify who you are and whose you are. You learn to hear his voice in the silence of manipulation. You learn to spot deception not because someone told you about it, but because you lived through it. You learned how to stand firm, not because you always felt strong, but because you were tired of being knocked down. That confusion was fertile ground for clarity, for growth, for awakening. It made you reach for something real. It made you ask harder questions. It forced you to stop leaning on people and start leaning on God. You stopped needing validation from broken vessels and started listening for the voice that's been speaking truth over you since the beginning. That storm didn't silence you, it sharpened you. It didn't make you weaker, it made you wiser. It taught you the difference between charm and character, between attention and intention, between control and commitment. It showed you what happens when you give too much of yourself to someone who was never built to hold that kind of weight. And now you're different. You walk different. You talk different. You listen better. You pray deeper. Because that confusion didn't just teach you about people, it taught you about you. It revealed what you were willing to tolerate and what you were born to rise above. Don't despise the fog. It forced you to develop night vision. It trained your spirit to see in the dark. And now that clarity has come. It's not just emotional, it's spiritual, it's soul deep. You can sense dishonesty before a word is even spoken because your clarity wasn't handed to you. It was wrestled from the middle of your confusion. You didn't just read about it. You bled for it. You cried for it. You begged God for it. And he answered not with an instant fix, but with a deeper knowing. He anchored your identity in something that doesn't shift with someone else's mood. Now you understand that peace is not passive. It's powerful. It's not just about calm circumstances, it's about clear vision. And what tried to blur your vision has now become the backdrop for your breakthrough. What tried to disorient you has now built a level of discernment in you that no one can take. You're not walking around confused anymore because the presence of God has cleared the smoke. He has taken what was meant to cloud your identity and used it to confirm your assignment. What once made you question everything now fuels your confidence. Because what the enemy meant for confusion, God is using for confirmation. This chaos is your catalyst. You thought it came to crush you, but it came to create something in you that couldn't have been formed any other way. The mess you're standing in right now, the confusion, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it's not random. It's a launching pad. It's not the end of your story. It's the fire that forges a new beginning. Because the God you serve doesn't just calm storms. Sometimes he uses them to carry you into places you never would have gone on your own. You didn't choose the chaos, but it's choosing what gets awakened inside you. When everything started spinning, when the narcissist started pulling strings, twisting words, distorting reality, you thought you were losing your mind. You thought you were drowning, but what you were actually doing was shedding the need to be understood by people who were committed to misunderstanding you, shedding the false version of yourself that learned to perform for peace, shedding the belief that love had to hurt, that loyalty meant silence, that being chosen meant being controlled. That chaos didn't break you. It revealed what could no longer stay buried. It woke you up. It pushed you out. It pulled you deeper into the presence of the only one who doesn't require performance for connection. And it was loud, the kind of loud that makes your soul ache, the kind of loud that shakes everything stable. But sometimes God has to let everything you depended on collapse so you can see that your foundation was never supposed to be in them. It was always supposed to be in Him. Sometimes the chaos isn't a punishment, it's a holy disruption, a divine interruption to expose the idols you didn't know you built, the approval you craved, the relationships you elevated, the version of yourself you protected. He let it shake so He could recenter what matters. Chaos is uncomfortable, but it's also revealing. It shows you who you are when things don't go your way. It exposes where you've placed your identity. It confronts the parts of you that got too comfortable in dysfunction. And it also introduces you to strength you didn't know you had, grace you never knew you needed, vision you couldn't see when everything was fine, because sometimes fine is the most dangerous place you can be. You settle, you shrink, you survive. But God didn't call you to survive, He called you to thrive. And thriving requires transition, and transition requires pressure. And pressure always feels like chaos before it feels like clarity. That narcissist didn't bring the chaos because you were weak. They brought it because your peace exposed their patterns. Your presence disrupted their control. Your growth threatened their grip. And even though it shook you, it couldn't stop you. Because chaos is only deadly when you don't know who you are. But when you've been in the fire and found God there, you walk different. You don't beg for crumbs of love from people who starve your soul. You don't apologize for the boundaries you had to build to protect your peace. You stop trying to fix what was never your responsibility and start becoming who you were always meant to be. You thought you were under attack, but you were being accelerated. What looked like a breakdown was actually a buildup. What felt like rejection was really redirection. And now you're here, clearer, stronger, more aware, more anointed, because the chaos didn't just show you who they were, it showed you who